I was setting the New Year's table in my small Seattle home when my daughter Sarah stormed in. The sound of the door slamming against the wall made me flinch. Her face was flushed, her eyes narrowed and filled with anger. "This place is for my mother-in-law. Get out now!" Before I could respond, she shoved me hard. I felt my body fly backward and slam into the wall. The pain in my back was immediate, but nothing compared to the pain in my heart. "Sarah, what are you doing?" My voice came out weak, almost a whisper. She didn't even look at me. She continued arranging the dishes as if I were invisible, as if I were nothing. "You don't deserve to sit at the main table. Go eat in the kitchen." I stood there, leaning against the wall, trying to process what had just happened. This wasn't my daughter. She couldn't be. The girl I'd raised, the one I'd sacrificed everything for, was kicking me out of my own New Year's table. My legs were shaking. My eyes burned with unshed tears. But the worst part was her cold gaze, as if I were a burden, a weight she needed to hide. My heart broke in that moment. Not from the physical pain of the push, but from the memory of everything I'd been through for her. Every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every tear shed in silence. I remembered the day she was born. I was only 20, alone, without her father, who fled upon learning of the pregnancy. I held that tiny baby in my arms and swore she would have everything I never had: education, opportunities, unconditional love. I've worked as a cleaner my whole life. It wasn't shameful, it was survival. But it wasn't easy. Sometimes 3 shifts a day. I'd wake up at 4 in the morning to clean offices in downtown Seattle, then rush off to clean wealthy families' homes in the afternoon, and end the day cleaning a restaurant until midnight. My hands were calloused before I was 30. My knees hurt so much I could barely climb stairs. But I kept going. Because Sarah needed new uniforms for school, because she wanted to take piano lessons, because she deserved a better childhood than mine. I remember the time she won a partial scholarship to college. I was so proud I cried for days. But the scholarship only covered tuition. Books, housing, and food were my responsibility. I took a 4th shift on weekends. My body begged for rest, but my heart wouldn't let my daughter give up on her dreams. And then came the diagnosis: Stage 2 breast cancer. The doctor said in that smooth, professional voice, "We need to start chemotherapy immediately." I looked at him and thought, how am I going to pay for this? How am I going to work feeling nauseous all day? But Sarah was a sophomore in college. She couldn't know. She couldn't care. So I hid it from her for months. I continued working during chemotherapy. There were days when I'd vomit in the bathroom between cleanings. Days when I was so exhausted, I'd lean my head against the wall for a few minutes just to keep from passing out. My hair started falling out in clumps. I bought a cheap wig at a thrift store. When Sarah visited me on weekends, I pretended to be fine. I cooked her favorite meals, smiled, and asked about classes. She never suspected. Or maybe she didn't want to see. In her 3rd year, books got more expensive. Law books cost a fortune. She called me crying, "Mom, I don't know how I'm going to make ends meet. It's over $2,000 just for materials this semester." I looked out the window at my only car, an old 1998 Honda Civic with a torn driver's seat and a broken air conditioner. But it was mine. It was my freedom, my independence. I sold it the next day. I transferred the money to her account without telling her where it came from. I started taking 3 buses to get to work. I woke up an hour early. I got home 2 hours later. But Sarah had her books. She graduated with honors. She landed a great job at a law firm. She met Mark, a man from a wealthy family. They married in a beautiful ceremony that I helped pay for, even though I wasn't invited to choose anything. Gradually, the calls became more infrequent. The visits became more spaced out. When I called, she was too busy. When I suggested lunch, she had important commitments. And now this. Now I was there, in my own home, being kicked out of the table I set myself with the food I prepared myself, by a daughter I raised alone with my hands destroyed from overwork. I looked at Sarah arranging the linen napkins, which I'd bought, and felt a pain no chemotherapy had ever caused, the pain of ingratitude, the pain of realizing all that love had been thrown away as if it were worthless. My tears finally flowed, silent, hot, bitter. Sarah. I tried again, my voice breaking. She finally looked at me, but her eyes were empty of any emotion. Don't embarrass me in front of Mark's family. Go to the kitchen, now. The doorbell rang exactly at 7 o'clock, punctual as a Swiss clock. I felt my entire body freeze. Sarah's expression immediately changed. The cold, cruel look disappeared, replaced by a fake, warm smile that made me nauseous. "It must be Diane," she sang, as if the last 20 minutes of humiliation had never happened. I was still leaning against the dining room wall, trying to process everything. My back ached where I'd hit it. My heart was in pieces, and now I had to pretend to be normal in front of strangers. I heard Sarah open the door with exaggerated enthusiasm. "Diane! Mark! Happy New Year!" Voices mingled in the entrance hall. Laughter. The sound of coats being hung up, footsteps approaching, and then she entered the room. Diane was exactly as Sarah had described her the few times she'd mentioned her mother-in-law. An elegant woman in her early 60s, with gray hair perfectly cut in a chic bob, wearing a simple but clearly expensive navy blue dress, pearls around her neck, discreet makeup. But what struck me most were her eyes. Kind eyes, warm, the kind that really see people. And in that moment, those eyes saw me. They saw my barely contained tears. They saw my defeated posture. They saw the pain I was trying to hide. "Margaret!" Diane walked straight to me, ignoring the beautifully set table, ignoring Sarah. "Happy New Year!" Before I could react, she hugged me. A real warm hug, the kind a mother gives. It had been so long since anyone had hugged me like that I nearly collapsed right there. She pulled away slightly, but kept her hands on my shoulders. Her eyes scanned my face with genuine concern. "What happened?" The question was soft but direct. "You're crying." I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. How would I explain? How would I say that my own daughter had just kicked me out of the New Year's table in my own house? Sarah quickly stepped forward, laughing nervously. "Oh, Diane, it's nothing. Mom gets emotional this time of year. You know how it is, memories, longing." Diane didn't take her eyes off me. She knew there was more to it. I could see it in the seriousness in her expression. "Margaret?" she insisted gently. That's when Sarah decided to do the unthinkable. "Diane." Sarah approached us, her voice suddenly filled with a false sadness that made me feel sick. "I need to tell you something. Something I've been hiding because it's so hard to accept." Diane finally looked at Sarah, frowning slightly. "What do you mean?" Sarah took a deep breath, as if gathering courage for a painful confession. Tears, fake tears, began to form in her eyes. She was a better actress than I ever imagined. "My mother has Alzheimer's." The world stopped. Diane blinked in surprise. Mark, standing behind her, also looked shocked, and I just froze, unable to process what I'd just heard. "What?" Diane's voice came out in a whisper. Sarah wiped away a non-existent tear. "It started a few months ago. Minor forgetfulness at first, but now it's getting worse. She gets confused, disoriented. Sometimes she doesn't recognize places. Sometimes she doesn't recognize me." Every word was a lie. Every syllable was a poison being spilled. "Sarah, this is terrible. Why didn't you tell us?" Diane looked genuinely concerned. "Because Mom is so proud," Sarah continued, her voice shaking with manufactured emotion. "She doesn't want anyone to know. She doesn't want to be treated like someone who needs to be taken care of. But it's getting dangerous." "Dangerous?" Mark spoke for the first time, his tone carefully calibrated to sound worried. Sarah nodded, wiping away more fake tears. "She's getting aggressive. She has mood swings. Just earlier today." She paused dramatically, looking at me with an expression of sadness that made me want to scream. "Today she tried to hit me." The silence that followed was deafening. Finally, I managed to speak. My voice was hoarse, shaking with anger and disbelief. "What?" But Sarah didn't stop. "I know you don't remember, Mom. It's part of the illness. You were having an episode, talking nonsense, and when I tried to calm you down, you raised your hand to me. That's not true." My voice rose, shock turning to indignation. "None of that is true. Sarah, how can you—" "See?" Sarah interrupted, looking at Diane with pleading eyes. "She's confused. She doesn't remember what she did. It's heartbreaking." I was in absolute shock at the lie, at her coldness, at the ease with which the words flowed from her mouth, constructing an alternate reality, transforming me into someone I wasn't. Diane looked from Sarah to me, clearly trying to process everything. She took a step toward me, and I saw something in her eyes, not accusation, but searching. She was trying to understand, trying to find the truth amidst the chaos. "Margaret." Diane took my hands in hers. Her hands were warm, soft, hands that knew kindness. "Is that true? Are you having memory problems?" I looked straight into her eyes. I didn't look away. I didn't hesitate. "No." My voice was firm now, despite the tears streaming down my face. "No, Diane, I'm fine. My memory is perfect. I don't have Alzheimer's. I didn't try to hit my daughter. I would never do that." "Mommy, please," Sarah began, but I interrupted her. "She's lying." My voice broke, but I continued. "She's lying because she pushed me, because she told me to leave the table, because she said I didn't deserve to sit with you. And now she's making up this horrible story to... I couldn't finish. The sobs came, uncontrollable. Sarah made a pitiful sound. "See, Diane? That's how she gets. Paranoid. She thinks everyone is against her. The doctor said those are classic symptoms." "What doctor?" I yelled. "I've never been to a doctor for this, because there's nothing wrong with me." Mark approached, placing his hand on Sarah's shoulder in a supportive gesture. "It's very difficult for her to accept, Margaret. It's understandable. No one wants to believe they're sick." "I'm not sick." Diane remained silent for a long moment. Her eyes were still fixed on mine, studying, assessing. I could see the conflict in her face. She had only just met Sarah a few months ago, after her wedding. But she was meeting me now, in this moment of chaos and accusations. Who would she believe? The daughter-in-law who seemed so worried and distressed? Or the older woman crying and denying everything? Sarah noticed Diane's hesitation. "I understand if you're uncomfortable, Diane. Maybe we should reschedule dinner. I don't want you to feel—" "No." Diane's voice cut through the air, firm and clear. Everyone looked at her. Diane squeezed my hands tighter. Her eyes hadn't left mine yet. And then something changed in her expression. A decision being made. A choice being made. "Margaret," she said calmly, "is this true? Look at me and tell me the truth. Are you sick? Did you try to hurt your daughter?" I cried harder now, but I kept my gaze fixed on hers. "No, Diane. I swear to everything holy. I'm fine. My mind is clear. I know exactly what's going on. And she's lying." Diane nodded slowly. Then, to my surprise and Sarah's horror, she said, "I believe in you." Sarah's face paled. "What?" Diane turned to face her daughter-in-law, her expression now cold. "I believe her, Sarah." I looked into Margaret's eyes and saw truth. I saw pain, yes. I saw confusion about why she was being accused of these terrible things. But I didn't see illness. I didn't see mental confusion. "Diane, you don't understand," Mark began. "I understand perfectly." Diane interrupted, her voice taking on a steely firmness that belied her gentle exterior. "I raised a son. I know when someone is lying, and I know the truth when I see it." Sarah tried to laugh, but it came out forced. "You just met her. How can you—" "Because I spent 65 years learning to read people, Sarah, and your mother isn't lying." Diane turned to me again, her expression softening. "Something happened here today, something that hurt you deeply, and I'm going to find out what it was." I stood there, still holding Diane's hands, feeling for the first time that night that maybe I wasn't completely alone. But the atmosphere in the room was heavy, charged with tension and unspoken accusations. It was Mark who broke the silence first, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Well, I think we're all a little nervous about the festivities. How about we sit down? The food looks beautiful, Margaret. You must have worked on it all day. Her attempt to calm the situation rang hollow, but Diane nodded diplomatically. Mark's right, it's New Year's. Let's enjoy the night. Sarah quickly seized the cue, her expression changing as if someone had flipped a switch. Panic gave way to a forced smile, her eyes still alert. Yes, of course. Mommy prepared a feast. Let's sit down. I looked at the table I'd set with such care. The candles lit, the napkins perfectly folded, my grandmother's dishes I rarely used. Everything was ready for a celebration that had turned into a nightmare. Diane gently released me and walked over to the table. To my surprise, she pulled out a chair next to me, the very spot Sarah had kicked me out of minutes earlier. Margaret, I'll sit here next to you if you don't mind, Diane said with a genuine smile. I want to get to know the woman who raised Sarah better. I saw Sarah's jaw tighten for a split second before she forced another smile. Of course, Diane. What a great idea. You two will get along so well. We all sat down, me, still trembling slightly. Diane beside me, her presence a silent shield. Sarah across from us, beside Mark, her eyes shooting me looks that mixed anger and warning, a silent warning for me to behave. I began serving the food with trembling hands. The turkey I'd roasted for hours, the creamy mashed potatoes, the caramelized vegetables, the fresh salad. Each dish passed from hand to hand in awkward silence. Mark picked up the bottle of wine. A toast? He suggested, his voice overly cheerful. To the new year? To new beginnings? To new beginnings, Diane repeated, raising her glass and looking directly at me with an encouraging smile. Glasses clinked. The sound echoed in the room, heavy with tension. The first few minutes of the meal were painfully uncomfortable. The only sound was the sound of silverware hitting porcelain. No one knew what to say. How could they return to normal after what had happened? But then, slowly, Sarah began to change her strategy. Diane, she began, her voice soft and admiring, that pearl necklace is absolutely stunning. Is it a family heirloom? Diane fingered the pearls absently. Yes, they were my grandmother's. She gave them to me shortly before she passed away. It's beautiful, Sarah sighed dramatically. You have such refined taste, Diane. I've always noticed that. The way you dress, the way you decorate your home. It's all so elegant, so classic. My stomach lurched. I knew that tone. It was the tone Sarah used when she wanted something. Diane smiled politely. Thank you, dear. That's kind of you to say. It's not kindness. It's the truth. Sarah leaned forward, her eyes shining with manufactured enthusiasm. Mark always comments on how good your taste is. Remember, love? Just the other day you said your mom should be a decorating consultant. Mark nodded, playing along. It's true. Mom has a special eye for design. Sarah laughed, a melodious, false sound. And it's not just aesthetic taste. Diane, you're so cultured, so well-mannered. When you talk about your travels through Europe, the museums you visited, the theaters, I'm fascinated. It must be incredible to have seen so much of the world. Well, I've been fortunate enough to be able to travel quite a bit, Diane replied modestly, but I could see she was a little more relaxed now. The mood at the table began to lighten. The tension was still there, pulsing beneath the surface, but Sarah was skillfully weaving a new atmosphere, one where she was the attentive and admired daughter-in-law. You know, Sarah continued, pouring Diane more wine without being asked, ever since I met you, I've always thought, that's the mother-in-law every woman would love to have. So elegant, so kind, so wise. Diane laughed softly. You flatter me, Sarah. It's not flattery. It's the absolute truth. Sarah placed her hand over Diane's on the table. Honestly, Diane, having you in the family is a blessing. You bring so much light, so much class. Sometimes I wonder how different it would be if all mothers-in-law were like you. She glanced at me quickly, so briefly that someone distracted wouldn't have noticed. But I did. And so did Diane. The message was clear. You are the good mother-in-law. She is not. I felt tears sting my eyes again, but I held them back. I wouldn't give Sarah the satisfaction of seeing me fall apart. Mark chimed in, supporting his wife. Mom, Sarah always comments on how special you are. She really admires you. It's true, Sarah nodded enthusiastically. Diane, you're everything I aspire to be when I'm your age. So well-rounded, so confident, so wonderful. The flattery continued, each word carefully chosen, each compliment strategically placed. Sarah talked about Diane's garden, her charity events, her art collection. Each topic was a new opportunity for adoration. And it worked. Slowly, the atmosphere at the table changed completely. The laughter began to flow more naturally. The wine flowed. Sarah told funny stories about work, Mark made jokes, and Diane, despite her initial distrust, began to relax. I remained quiet, eating mechanically, feeling increasingly invisible, increasingly like the intruder in my own home. And Margaret, Diane turned to me suddenly, pulling me back into the conversation. Sarah told me you worked your whole life as… What was it, dear? Cleaning lady, I replied quietly, feeling ashamed for the first time in my life about my honest work. Mom always worked really hard, Sarah said quickly, but there was something in her tone, a barely concealed condescension. She never had the opportunities other people did, you know, but she did the best she could with what she had. The best I could. The words echoed in my mind, as if my sacrifices were only the best I could do and not all I had. Honest work is always admirable, Diane said gently. But Sarah was already changing the subject. Diane, you need to tell me more about that fundraiser you organized last month. Mark showed me the pictures and everything was so stunning. And so we returned to Diane's adoration. Sarah was tireless, finding new angles, new compliments, new admiration to express. It was like watching a performance, and she was the lead actress. Mark laughed at Diane's stories. Sarah sighed in admiration. Diane gradually forgot her initial tension, enveloped by the attention and seemingly genuine affection. I watched it all, feeling smaller and smaller, more and more erased, as if I were disappearing right there at my own table, in my own home. And when Sarah looked at me over her wine glass, I saw a triumphant gleam in her eyes, a silent message. See? I won. She's mine now. Dinner ended around 11 o'clock. Diane hugged Sarah warmly at the door, thanked her for a wonderful evening, and gave me an even tighter hug. We'll talk soon, Margaret, she whispered in my ear, so quietly only I could hear. I promise. I waved as she and Mark got into the car. The taillights disappeared around the bend in the street, taking with them my only witness, my only ally. The door closed, and the sound of that door closing was like a guillotine falling. I turned and saw Sarah leaning against the wood, her arms crossed, all her sweet smile and melodious voice of the last hour completely gone. In her place was the cold, cruel woman I'd seen earlier, the real Sarah. You almost ruined everything, she said, her voice low and dangerous. Sarah, I don't… Shut up! She advanced on me, and I instinctively took a step back. Diane almost believed you, almost. If she had investigated further, if she had asked questions… Mark came downstairs, locking the front door with a key. The sound of the lock turning made me realize, for the first time, that I was trapped. In my own home, I was trapped with two people who clearly weren't who I thought they were. What do you want from me? My voice came out shaky. Sarah laughed, but it was a humorless sound. What do we want? We want you to disappear, to become invisible, to not ruin our plans. What plans? What are you talking about? Mark walked over, standing beside Sarah. They looked like predators circling prey. Diane has money, Margaret. Lots of it. 8 million in investments, to be exact. And she's getting old. I felt my blood run cold. You're planning… We're planning to secure our future, Sarah interrupted. Mark is an only child. Everything will be his eventually. But we need Diane to trust us, completely. And you, with your accusations and your drama, will ruin everything. She's your mother-in-law. How can I what? Be smart? Think about the future? Sarah shrugged, as if we were discussing the dinner menu and not plotting against an innocent woman. You've spent your whole life being poor and pathetic, Mom, cleaning up other people's messes. I won't suffer that fate. I deserve better. Every word was a slap in the face. I worked to give you a better life. Everything I did was for you. And should I be grateful? Sarah laughed again bitterly. You gave me the bare minimum, Mom. Cheap clothes, public school, a tiny house. Meanwhile, I saw my friends with parents who were doctors, lawyers, businessmen. They had everything. I had you and your calloused cleaning hands. Tears streamed down my face. Sarah, you shame me. She spat the words like venom. You always have. And now that I've finally found a way to have the life I've always wanted, you won't ruin it for me. Mark put his hand on her shoulder. Sarah, love, you have to be quick. My mom might call. You're right. Sarah looked at me with calculated coldness. You're going to spend the night somewhere you can't cause trouble. What? My heart started beating faster. Sarah, what are you going to do? She didn't answer. She simply nodded to Mark, and before I could react, he grabbed me by the arms. His hands were strong, much stronger than I expected. Let me go, I screamed, trying to struggle. Sarah, for God's sake. You're going to ruin everything, Sarah yelled back, her face contorted with rage. Diane was starting to trust me, and you had to open your mouth. You had to be dramatic. You had to be you. Mark started dragging me across the room. I struggled, trying to dig my feet into the floor, but he was too strong. My slippers slipped on the hardwood floor. Please don't do this. Sarah, I'm your mother. You are nothing to me, she replied, cold as ice. They dragged me to the basement door. An old wooden door I rarely opened, which led to a cold, damp space I used only to store old boxes and rusty tools. Sarah opened the door. A musty, earthy smell immediately wafted up. The stairs leading down were steep, the wooden treads worn and rickety. No, please, I begged, genuine terror taking over me now. Don't put me down there. I promise I won't say anything. Too late for promises, Mark said, his voice eerily calm. They pushed me. I stumbled down the first few steps, my hands grasping for the old railing. I managed to catch myself before I fell completely, but Mark kept pushing me, forcing me down. The stairs groaned beneath our feet. Each step was a torture of fear and pain in my already injured back. We reached the bottom. The basement was everything I remembered, and worse. Cold, damp, dark except for the dim light coming from the open door at the top of the stairs. Boxes stacked against the walls. Cobwebs in the corners. The concrete floor was cold beneath my feet. Please, I tried again, my voice breaking. Sarah, I created you. I love you. How can you do this? She descended the last few steps and stood in front of me. In that moment, with the dim light illuminating her face from below, she looked like a stranger. Someone I'd never met. You're going to disappear from my life, she said, each word spoken with deliberate care. Diane will think you had another episode and ran away. We'll file a police report. We'll look concerned. And when she offers us comfort, when she brings us closer to her, we'll be ready. You're crazy, I whispered. You're both crazy. Mark was already climbing the stairs. Sarah, let's go. The longer we stay here. Sarah gave me one last look. You should have kept your mouth shut during dinner, Mom. You should have accepted your place. She ran up the stairs quickly. I ran after her, but my legs were still shaky, my movements too slow. Sarah! Sarah! The door slammed shut. I heard a scraping sound, probably a chair or table being pushed against the door, and then the sound that made my heart skip a beat, a padlock being locked. Click! No! Please! I ran up the stairs as fast as I could, pounding on the door with my fists. Get me out of here! Sarah! Mark! Silence. Please! I screamed until my voice was hoarse. Someone help me! But it was useless. My house was isolated, my nearest neighbors at least 100 meters away. And on New Year's Eve, with fireworks exploding everywhere, who would hear an old woman's screams? I pounded on the door until my hands ached. I screamed until my throat burned. And finally, when I had no more strength, I slid to the bottom of the stairs, hugging my knees, trembling. The basement was completely dark now. They must have turned off the upstairs light. Only a tiny sliver of light came from under the door, so dim it barely illuminated my own feet. The cold began to seep in. It wasn't just the chill of a Seattle winter. It was the deep damp of an uninsulated basement. I felt it in my back, in my legs, in my already weary bones. Trembling, I made my way back down the steps, groping in the dark. My hands found one of the old boxes. I opened it, expecting to find perhaps an old blanket. But it was just musty books and papers. I kept searching, blind in the dark. My fingers touched cold, sticky surfaces. Cobwebs. Things I didn't want to identify. I was starting to panic. The kind of deep panic that comes when you're trapped in a dark space and realize no one knows where you are, no one is going to look for you. When my fingers touched something in my coat pocket, my cell phone, my old phone, the one I still kept as a backup, which I'd put in my pocket earlier when I was tidying up. Sarah and Mark hadn't thought to look for it. With trembling hands, I pulled out the device. The screen illuminated the basement with a ghostly blue light. It had 23% battery life. I stared at the screen, thinking, call the police? But what if Sarah and Mark heard the sirens and ran? What if they made up some story, said I was delusional? My fingers hovered over the contacts. There were so few numbers there. I had so few people in my life. And then I saw it. The number Diane had given me during dinner, when Sarah wasn't looking, when she'd whispered, call me if you need anything. I pressed the call button. It rang once, twice, 3 times. Hello? Diane's voice sounded sleepy but worried. Diane. My voice came out in a desperate whisper. Diane, please, you have to help me. Margaret, what happened? It's almost midnight. Tears streamed down my face as I spoke, as quietly as I could, afraid that Sarah and Mark were still somewhere in the house listening. They locked me in the basement. Sarah and Mark. They have a plan, Diane. A plan against you. For your money. They locked me in here and I'm so scared. There was silence on the other end. For a terrible moment, I thought she'd hung up, that she didn't believe me. But then her voice came back, steady and clear, all the sleep gone. Stay calm, Margaret. I'll be right there. Don't hang up the phone. Can you hear me? Yes, I sobbed. Yes, I can. So take a deep breath. I believe in you, and I'm going to get you out of there. I held the phone to my chest, the dim light of the screen the only thing between me and complete darkness, and prayed that Diane would arrive in time. I crouched in the back of the basement, holding the phone to my ear, listening to Diane's breathing on the other end. She hadn't hung up, as she'd promised. Every few minutes, she whispered words of encouragement. I'm almost there, Margaret. Hold on tight. I'm 10 minutes away. Take a deep breath. I'm already on your street. And then finally, I'm here. I heard the muffled sound of a car pulling up outside. My heart raced. Salvation was so close, but so was fear. What would Sarah and Mark do when they found out? Diane, I whispered urgently into the phone, be careful with them. They're dangerous. More so than you know. I'll be careful. Now be quiet. We don't want them to know you called me. The line went silent, but she didn't hang up. I could hear muffled noises, footsteps, the sound of Diane getting out of the car, walking to my door. And then, high above me, through the basement ceiling, I heard the doorbell ring. Once, twice, 3 times insistently, muffled voices. Sarah, Diane. He couldn't make out the words, but the tone was clear. Diane was demanding. Sarah was resisting. From my still-connected phone, I heard Diane's voice more clearly, picked up by the microphone on her cell phone in her pocket. Sarah, where's Margaret? Sarah's response was immediate, but I could hear her nervousness even through the walls. Diane, what are you doing here? It's almost midnight. Where's your mother, Sarah? Diane repeated, more firmly now. She left. Sarah's voice was strange, high-pitched. After you left, she had an episode. She got confused, her speech rambling. She ran out the door before we could stop her. Out? Diane's disbelief was palpable. On New Year's Day, in the cold, and you just let it happen? We tried to hold her back, Mark chimed in now. But she was out of it, Diane. You saw her at dinner, the mental confusion, the paranoia. I saw a scared woman, Diane snapped, and now I'm going to look for her. Get out of the way. I heard footsteps, Diane entering the house, probably pushing Sarah aside. Diane, wait. Sarah followed her. You can't just break into our house. It's her house, not yours, Diane replied dryly. Margaret, where are you? My heart wanted to scream back, but I kept silent. Through the still-connected phone, I heard everything with frightening clarity. Footsteps walking across the room, Diane calling my name, Sarah and Mark following her, their voices growing more nervous. She's not here, Diane. Please, you need to leave. Margaret! Diane ignored Sarah completely. And then the footsteps stopped, right above me. I could hear them perfectly now. Diane was standing in front of the basement door. What's down there? His voice sounded suspicious. Nothing, just a basement, Sarah answered too quickly. Full of old boxes. It's a horrible, filthy place. Then why is there a chair against the door? Diane asked. Silence. And why? Diane's voice dropped dangerously low. Is there a new lock on a door leading to the basement? Diane, I can explain, Mark began. Margaret! Diane screamed now, pounding on the door. Are you down there? I couldn't contain myself any longer. Diane, yes, I'm here! What happened next was a chaos of sounds. Diane yelling at Sarah and Mark to get out of the way. Sarah yelling that Diane was trespassing. The sound of furniture being dragged, the chair being removed from the doorway. Give me the key to that lock, now, Diane demanded. We don't have any keys. Sarah lied through her teeth. That lock has been there for years. Liar! Diane screamed, and I heard something breaking, probably her picking up something to try to force the lock. Diane, stop! You're acting crazy! Mark tried to intervene. Crazy? Crazy? Diane's voice was thick with righteous fury. You locked an elderly woman in a basement in the middle of winter. I'm calling the police right now. No! Sarah screamed, and I heard the sound of struggling, probably her trying to get Diane's phone. Let me go! Diane screamed. The padlock gave way with a metallic snap. Diane had managed to break it. Don't go down there! Sarah's voice was pure panic now. The door opened. A glorious light flooded the basement stairs. I could see Diane's silhouette at the top, her cell phone illuminating the way. Margaret, I'm going down. Hold on. Diane began to carefully descend the steps, using the light on her phone to see where she was stepping. The old steps groaned under her weight. I stood, shivering with cold and fear, but with hope for the first time in hours. Diane, careful! The ladder is unstable. That's when I saw Sarah appear at the top of the stairs, behind Diane. My daughter's face was contorted with rage and despair. Her eyes were those of a cornered animal. And in the hallway behind her, I saw Mark. They exchanged a look, just for a second. But in that second, a decision was made. Mark nodded slightly, and Sarah moved. Diane, watch out! I screamed, but it was too late. Sarah stepped forward and pushed her mother-in-law hard in the back. Now you two get lost, Sarah screamed, her voice ragged with something bordering on hysteria. Everything seemed to happen in slow motion. Diane lost her balance completely. Her arms flailed in the air, trying to grab onto something, anything. Her phone flew from her hand, hitting the wall. She fell. She rolled down the stairs like a rag doll, her body hitting each wooden step with horrible dry sounds that echoed through the basement. A thud. Another. Another. No! I screamed, instinctively backing against the wall. Diane reached the bottom of the stairs and stood still. Her body was in an awkward position, one arm bent at an unnatural angle. Her eyes were closed. Blood was beginning to trickle from her temple. I was paralyzed with horror, unable to process what I had just witnessed. At the top of the stairs, Sarah stood frozen, her hands still outstretched from the push. Her face was pale, her eyes wide. For a moment, she looked genuinely shocked by what she had done. But it was just a moment. Mark appeared beside her, looking down at the motionless body of his own mother. His face didn't show shock or horror. It showed something far worse. Calculation. "Sarah," he said softly, his voice eerily calm. "Scream, scream now." Sarah blinked, still in a trance. "What?" "Shout," Mark ordered. "Scream that she fell, that it was an accident. Now!" And Sarah, as if someone had pressed a button, transformed her face into a mask of false horror and began to scream. "Mark! Mark! Call an ambulance!" His voice was high-pitched, hysterical, perfectly calibrated to sound like genuine panic. "Your mother fell! She fell down the stairs!" Mark already had his cell phone in his hand, dialing. His voice when he spoke was that of a worried son, trembling just the right amount. "Hello? I need an ambulance urgently. My mother fell down the stairs. She's unconscious. There's blood. Please come quickly." He gave the address, answered the operator's questions, all while looking down at me with cold, empty eyes. Sarah continued her performance, sobbing loudly. "How did this happen? She was looking for my mother and the stairs are so old, so dangerous." I ran to Diane, kneeling beside her. My hands trembled as I touched her neck, feeling for a pulse. It was there, faint, but it was there. "She's alive," I shouted up. "She's breathing." "Did you hear that?" Mark said into the phone. "She's breathing, but she needs urgent help." I took off my coat and gently placed it over Diane, trying to keep her warm. Blood continued to trickle from the wound on her head. I pressed the sleeve of my sweater against her, trying to stop the bleeding. "Diane," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. "Diane, please hold on, please." Her eyes didn't open. She was completely unconscious. At the top of the stairs, Sarah and Mark continued their charade. "It was so fast," Sarah cried. "She went downstairs to look for Mom, who must have run away in one of her fits, and she just lost her footing." "The ladder is old," Mark added to whoever was on the other end of the line. "Rotten wood. We already warned you it was dangerous." Lies. All lies rehearsed on the spot, constructing an alternative narrative. In the distance, I heard sirens beginning to wail. The ambulance was coming. Mark hung up the phone and finally descended a few steps, not all of them, keeping a safe distance. He looked at me with an expression that chilled my blood. "You're going to be quiet," he said softly, so only I could hear over Sarah's sobs. "You're going to say you really ran away, that you were confused, that you came back and found my mother here, that it was an accident." "It was you!" I screamed. "You and her. You pushed Diane." "Who's going to believe you?" Mark smiled coldly. "An old woman with Alzheimer's whose own daughter says she's delusional? Or a young couple crying over their tragically fallen mother, looking for their confused mother-in-law?" The sirens were louder now, very close. Sarah descended a few steps as well, her face still a mask of false sadness. But when she looked at me, I saw something completely different in her eyes. Triumph. "You should have stayed where you are, Mom," she whispered. "Now we have a perfect alibi. Diane went down looking for you, and when she dies, and she will die, we'll have access to the entire inheritance. No suspicions, no investigations." "She's not going to die," I said, my voice shaking with anger and fear. "And I'm going to tell her everything." "Tell me," Sarah shrugged. "No one will believe it." The front door banged open. Voices shouting, paramedics. "Down here!" Mark yelled, his voice returning to its rehearsed panic. "In the basement! Please, she needs help!" Heavy footsteps ran. 3 paramedics came down the stairs quickly, equipment clanking. "Stand back," one of them ordered, and I backed away, pressing myself against the wall. They knelt around Diane, checking vital signs, immobilizing her neck, preparing the stretcher. Weak pulse, head injury, possible spinal fracture. "We need to move her now." "What happened?" a paramedic asked as he worked. Mark answered immediately, his voice cracking with false emotion. "My mother. She was looking for her mother-in-law who ran away from home. The ladder is old. She lost her footing and fell. The paramedic glanced at the stairs, noticing the worn rungs. He nodded, accepting the explanation. "And you?" He looked at me. "Are you hurt?" I looked at Sarah and Mark. They were staring at me, daring me to contradict their story. "She's confused," Sarah stepped forward, placing her hand on the paramedic's shoulder. "My mom has Alzheimer's. That's why Diane came. She was worried. And now, this." Sarah started crying again, burying her face in her hands. The paramedics exchanged knowing glances. They had dealt with families in crisis before. "We'll take her to Harborview," the team leader said. "You guys can follow behind." They placed Diane on the stretcher with extreme care, immobilizing every part of her body. Carrying her up the stairs was a slow and meticulous process. I tried to follow them, but Mark held my arm tightly, his fingers digging into my skin. "You stay here," he whispered. "We're not finished with you yet." But one of the paramedics noticed. "You need to come too. You need to be checked out." "It's not necessary," Mark began. "Protocol," the paramedic interrupted firmly. "She was on scene. She needs to be evaluated." Mark was forced to let me go. I climbed the stairs, my legs barely supporting me. I emerged from the basement as if I were emerging from a tomb. Flashing lights, red and blue, reflecting off the walls. Neighbors had emerged from their homes, watching from outside. Police were beginning to arrive as well. I watched as Diane was loaded into the ambulance, her face pale and still beneath the oxygen mask. "I'm going with her," Mark announced, his voice still full of fake concern. "And me too," Sarah added. "Just an escort," the paramedic said. Mark climbed into the ambulance without hesitation, giving me one last warning look before the doors closed. Sarah stood beside me on the sidewalk, still sobbing to the audience of curious neighbors. But when she leaned toward me, whispering too softly for the others to hear, her voice was cold as steel. "She won't wake up, Mommy. And if she does, it will be too late. Tomorrow morning, we'll go to the bank. We'll transfer everything. And then we'll disappear. And you'll be left here, with your empty house and your memories, knowing you've lost everything." Sarah entered the house, giving me one last warning look. "I'm going to get my things and go to the hospital. You stay here, quiet." She went upstairs, leaving me alone in the devastated living room. My heart was pounding. I had the recording, but I needed more. I needed concrete evidence. I needed to know exactly what they were planning. I waited until I heard the bedroom door close. Then, with legs still shaking, I went back down to that damned basement. Not to get stuck, to get something I had left there. Diane's cell phone. It had flown out of her hand when Sarah pushed her, slamming it against the wall. I searched for it with the light from my own phone until I found it on the floor near an old box. The screen was cracked, but it still worked. 23% battery. I ran upstairs, put my phone in my pocket with mine, and left through the back door before Sarah came down. The night was freezing. The air cut through my lungs as I ran through the dark streets of Seattle. My feet ached. I was still in my slippers. My hands were bleeding from the scratches in the basement. My entire body ached, but I couldn't stop. Harborview Medical Center was 3 miles away. Normally I would have taken a bus, but it was almost 1 a.m. on New Year's Day. There was no public transportation, so I ran. I ran like I hadn't run in years. My lungs burned. My heart felt like it was going to explode. People still partying in the streets looked at me strangely. An old, dirty woman, running as if fleeing the devil. And I was. I was running from my own demons. It took almost an hour. An hour of running, brisk walking, then running again when my legs allowed. I passed street parties, staggering drunks, fireworks still exploding in the sky. Finally, the lights of the hospital appeared ahead. I walked into the emergency room, completely exhausted. My clothes were soiled with basement dust and sweat. My hair was disheveled. My slippers were torn. My face was streaked with tears and dirt. The receptionist, a young woman in blue scrubs, looked up and saw me. Her eyes widened slightly. "Ma'am, are you okay?" She stood up, worried. "Do you need help?" I need..." My voice was hoarse from running. Diane Morrison. She was admitted here. She fell down some stairs." The receptionist quickly checked the computer. "Yes, she's here. But ma'am, you're hurt. Let me get someone to—" "No!" I said louder than I intended. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. "I'm sorry. I need to know how she is. Please." The receptionist studied me for a moment, clearly torn between protocol and compassion. Compassion won out. "She's in surgery," he said gently. "Head trauma. They're doing everything they can. Are you family?" I hesitated. Technically, I wasn't. But Diane had become more like family in the last few hours than Sarah had been in the last few years. "I'm a friend. A very close friend." The receptionist nodded. "The waiting room is that way. But seriously, ma'am, you need someone to look at those hands." "Later," I promised. "First, I need to wait for Diane." I walked to the waiting room, my legs finally giving out. I dropped into one of the hard plastic chairs. The room was almost empty, just a man sleeping in the corner and a young woman leafing through an old magazine. And across the room, near the coffee machine, Mark. His back was to me, talking on the phone. His voice was low, but in the quiet of the waiting room at 2 a.m, I could hear snatches. "Unconscious. Doctors don't know if he'll wake up. Perfect." My blood froze. Silently, I moved closer, hiding behind a column. I took out my phone and started recording again. Mark continued speaking, his voice cold and calculating, so different from the worried son he had portrayed to the paramedics. "Sarah, that's perfect. My mom is in a medically induced coma. The doctors said that even if she survives the surgery, the brain damage could be permanent." Pause. He was listening to Sarah on the other end. "Exactly. Tomorrow morning, as soon as the bank opens, we'll go. I have the power of attorney my mother signed last month. Remember when I said it was only for emergencies?" He laughed softly, a humorless sound. "Well, this is our emergency." My hand shook holding the phone, but I kept the recording running. 8 million, Sarah. 8 million that we transferred to the Cayman Islands account we opened last month. By the time they find out, if they find out, we'll already be in Mexico. Another pause. The old woman? He must be talking about me. Leave her alone. Who's going to believe her? She has no proof of anything. And with my mother in a coma or dead, there's no one to contradict our story. He laughed again, and the sound made me feel sick. "I know. You did well to push them both. Now we have full access to the money without anyone getting in the way. Mom is finally good for something." Tears of rage streamed down my face as I recorded each venomous word. "I'll meet you there at 9. Wear that black dress, the mourning one. We need to look devastated." Another pause. "I love you too. Soon we'll be rich and free." He hung up. I stood frozen behind the column, clutching my phone tightly. I had it all now, the full confession, the entire plan, all recorded. Mark turned to head back down the hallway, and I quickly moved behind a large plant, hiding. He passed me by without noticing, his footsteps echoing on the linoleum floor. When he disappeared down the hall, I took a deep breath. He needed to see Diane. He needed her to know. He needed her to hear what her own son had become. I waited a few more minutes to make sure Mark wouldn't come back. Then discreetly, I approached the receptionist again. "Diane Morrison's operating room. Where is it?" She frowned. "Ma'am, only family can—" "Please." My voice broke genuinely now. "She has no one else. Her son. He's not who she thinks he is. And she needs to know. When she wakes up, she needs to know the truth." Something in my desperation touched the receptionist. She looked around, checking if anyone was watching, then whispered, "3rd floor, trauma ward. But if anyone asks, you didn't hear it from me." "Thank you," I whispered back. I took the elevator to the 3rd floor. The hallways were white and sterile, smelling of disinfectant. Nurses hurried past. Machines beeped in closed rooms. I found the trauma ward, a long hallway with several doors. Red lights above some of them indicating surgeries in progress. The light over a door at the end of the hallway was off. The surgery was over. Diane Morrison. The name was on a plaque next to the door. I looked around. No nurses were in the hallway at the moment. Everyone was busy with other New Year's Eve emergencies. I gently pushed the door open and walked in. I entered the room silently, my heart still racing from running and the fear of being discovered. The lights were low. The air smelled of antiseptic and hope. The rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor filled the room with a sense of constant tension. Diane lay there, motionless, her eyes closed and a thick bandage on her forehead. I approached slowly, my footsteps barely audible on the polished floor. "Diane," I whispered, my voice breaking. For a second I feared she might actually be unconscious. But suddenly, her eyes opened, alive, alert, and, to my astonishment, lucid. "Margaret!" she gasped softly. "Are you okay?" I felt a lump in my throat. "I am, Diane. I thought you were unconscious, or worse." She took a deep breath, her eyes welling up. "I'm pretending," she murmured. "I need them to believe I won't wake up. It's the only way to keep me alive. Mark and Sarah are dangerous, Margaret. Much more so than I imagined." I looked around, making sure no one was around. I closed the door carefully, the soft click echoing like a pact. I sat down beside the bed, holding her cold hand. "Diane, I have something to show you," I whispered. I pulled my phone out of my pocket, trembling. I recorded everything, from the basement to Mark's conversation at the hospital. Her eyes widened. The elegant, restrained expression gave way to horror. I pressed the button and let the audio play very softly, almost a mechanical whisper between us. Mark's cold voice echoed, "My mother is in a coma. It's perfect. Tomorrow we're going to the bank. 8 million. By the time they find out, we'll be in Mexico." Diane brought her hand to her mouth, trying to hold back a sob. The tears fell silently, one after the other. "My own son," she whispered, her voice breaking. "My only son wants to kill me for money." I gripped her hand tightly, my chest burning with empathy and anger. "We'll end this together, Diane. No one will get away with it." She took a deep breath, and for an instant, the pain gave way to something else. Fire. A new glow lit her eyes. "Together," she repeated firmly. "We will make them pay for every tear, for every lie." That silent promise between us seemed stronger than the fear. It was as if, suddenly, two broken women had become allies, two mothers betrayed but still standing. Diane looked at me with a weak but determined smile. "Margaret, go now, before they come back. They can't see you here." I nodded. "I'll be back tomorrow. With the police." She held my hand again, her eyes welling up. "Be careful, my friend. They're capable of anything." I walked away slowly, my heart pounding. I left the room silently, gliding down the white hallway until I reached the elevator. Each step seemed to echo like a war drum. Outside, the Seattle chill hit me in the face. I quickly crossed the street and found a small, inexpensive hotel with a neon sign flashing "Vacancy." I slipped in quietly, paid the room rate with the little I had in my purse, and went upstairs to my room. The dried blood on my hand had stopped oozing, but the pain remained, physical and emotional. I sat on the edge of the bed, looked out the window at the lit hospital across the street, and whispered to myself, "They think they've won, but tomorrow will be their day to fall." I had barely slept. I spent the night sitting on the edge of my bed, going over every detail of the recording, mentally preparing what we would do. At 7:30, I returned to the hospital. Walking through the white corridors again gave me chills, but the nurse's firm gaze upon seeing me enter gave me strength. She discreetly led me to Diane's room. Diane lay in bed, her eyes closed, hooked up to life support, but alive, alert, and faking it perfectly. Her arm was immobilized in a sling, and the bandage on her head now only partially covered the wound. When the nurse left, Diane opened her eyes and looked at me knowingly. "They're here," he whispered. "They just arrived and spent the night watching the room, feigning concern." I heard everything. I nodded, my heart racing. "Officer Chen is already on standby. As soon as they leave, we'll head straight to the police station." It wasn't long. At 8:10, I heard hurried footsteps in the hallway. Sarah entered first, her hair hastily tied up, her face pale, her eyes red from practiced crying. Mark followed close behind, his suit crumpled, holding a black briefcase. "Honey, we need to go now," he said, his voice low but urgent. "The bank opens at 9. If we delay, it might raise suspicions." Sarah glanced at the bed where Diane was pretending to be asleep. "What if she wakes up?" she asked nervously. Mark glanced at the heart monitor, which was beeping rhythmically. "He won't. And even if he does wake up, he won't remember anything." He placed his hand on her shoulder. "Let's go before anyone gets suspicious." Sarah took a deep breath, gave her mother-in-law one last look, and whispered something that made me shiver. "Goodbye, Mom. I hope you never wake up." I waited for the sound of footsteps to fade down the hallway. Diane opened her eyes slowly, her breath shaky. "Now, Margaret. It's now or never." Helping her sit up was difficult. She was still weak, and her arm in a cast made every movement painful. But the determination in her eyes was stronger than any pain. I grabbed her purse and the envelope with the audio recordings. We exited through the back of the hospital, Diane wearing a loose coat to hide her cast. The chilly air hit us as soon as we stepped onto the sidewalk. We hailed a taxi and headed straight to the Central Police Station. The building was gray, imposing, and seemed to carry the weight of hundreds of stories of pain and justice. Upon entering, we were greeted by a middle-aged police officer with a firm gaze and a confident voice. His badge read, "Chen." "Good morning. How can I help you?" Diane sat up straighter in her chair, even though she looked pale and haggard. "Officer Chen, we are the victims of attempted murder and a multi-million-dollar scam. We have proof," she said with impressive calm. I placed my cell phone on the table. "Here are the recordings. They confess everything. They tried to kill me and push Diane down the stairs. They planned to steal her money and flee the country." The officer took out his cell phone, put on his headphones, and listened intently. As Sarah and Mark's voices rang out, cold, calculating, laughing about the inheritance and the accident, his expression changed. The seasoned professional gave way to the indignant man. When he removed his headphones, his eyes were as serious as stone. "They were right," he said, standing up. "That's more than enough. Let's get them right now." He made a few quick calls, summoning patrol cars and financial crimes officers. Within minutes, the sound of crackling radios and hurried footsteps filled the room. "They must be going to the central bank, right?" Chen asked. Diane confirmed. "First Branch Northwest Bank downtown. Mark has a fake power of attorney." "Perfect," the police officer replied. "Our patrol cars are already on their way. If you stay here, we can call them as soon as we locate them." Time seemed to freeze. Diane and I waited side by side, silent, watching the clock tick by. Each minute felt like an eternity. Until the phone at the counter rang. The police officer answered and looked at us immediately. "We got them." My heart raced. "Where?" I asked, breathless. "At the bank entrance." They tried to withdraw a large sum of cash and present false documents. Our patrol cars surrounded them before they entered. Diane covered her face with her hands, tears streaming silently. I felt such profound relief that my legs nearly gave out. Chen looked at me. "If you want, you can accompany them to the location." We arrived a few minutes later. The sirens were flashing blue and red in front of the bank. Several onlookers were watching the scene. Sarah and Mark stood with their hands handcuffed next to a police car. The black suitcase, the same one Mark was carrying, was open on the hood, stuffed with $100 bills. Mark kept his gaze cold, expressionless. Sarah, on the other hand, was crying desperately, her face streaked with tears and her makeup smeared. When she saw me getting out of the car with Officer Chen and Diane beside me, she started screaming. "Mom! Mom, help me! I didn't want to do this. It was Mark. He made me." "I swear, Mom. I swear." I stood still, just a few feet away from her. The crowd around me seemed to disappear. I saw only the girl who had once been my daughter and who was now a stranger. I took a deep breath, tears burning my eyes, but my voice was firm. "You locked me in a basement to die, Sarah. You pushed an innocent girl down the stairs. You tried to steal and destroy the woman who raised you." She sobbed. "I just wanted a better life. And you destroyed two to do so." I took a step forward. "You're not my daughter anymore." The silence that followed was broken only by the cameras of the reporters who were already beginning to record the scene. Sarah screamed again, but the officers put her inside the patrol car. Mark was the last to enter, maintaining that blank, cold, remorseless gaze. As the door closed and the siren faded, Diane turned to me, her face streaked with tears, but with a faint smile on her lips. "We won together, Margaret." I looked at her and felt the weight of everything lift, replaced by a quiet peace. "Yes, Diane, together." The icy Seattle wind swept past us, carrying away the echo of sirens. For the first time in a long time, I felt the air was light, and that finally, justice had found its way. The trial took place 3 months after that New Year's Eve. 3 months that felt like an eternity. Diane spent 2 weeks in the hospital recovering. The broken arm, the concussion, the bruised ribs, everything healed slowly. But what didn't heal so quickly was the pain of discovering who her son really was. I remember the afternoon she finally listened to all the recordings. We sat in the hospital room, just the two of us, and I placed my phone on the table next to the bed. "Are you sure you want to hear it?" I asked, holding his hand. Diane nodded, her jaw set. I need to hear it from him." I pressed play. Mark's voice filled the silent room, cold, calculating. Talking about her money as if it were a prize to be won. Talking about her as if she were merely an obstacle. "Mom is finally good for something." I saw the exact moment Diane's heart broke. A single tear ran down her face, but she didn't make a sound. She just squeezed my hand tighter. When the recording ended, we were silent for long minutes. "I failed him," she finally whispered. "Somewhere, somehow, I failed him." "No," I replied firmly. "You didn't fail. He chose this path, just as Sarah chose hers." Diane looked at me, and I saw something shift in her eyes. The sadness was still there, but there was also determination, righteous anger, strength. "We will destroy them," she said calmly. "Legally, completely. They won't get away with it." And they did not escape. Diane's lawyer was the best in Seattle. With the recordings, witnesses, and medical evidence, the case was practically sealed. The prosecution offered a plea deal, but Diane refused. "I want a full trial," she said. "I want everything to be public. I want the world to know exactly who they are." The trial date arrived on a cold March morning. The courtroom was packed. The story had made headlines. Daughter and son-in-law try to murder elderly women for $1 million inheritance. I walked into the courtroom hand in hand with Diane. She was elegant as ever, wearing a navy blue suit, her arm still slightly scarred, but completely healed. I wore a simple dress Diane had bought me. She insisted I needed new clothes. "No more cleaning uniforms," she had said with a smile. "You deserve better than that." Sarah and Mark were already seated at the defense table. Sarah wore a conservative black dress, her hair tied back, trying to look innocent. Mark was in a suit, his face carefully neutral. When Sarah saw me, her eyes widened. I think she was still hoping I wouldn't show up, that I was too scared or embarrassed. But I wasn't. Not anymore. The trial lasted 5 days. 5 days of testimony, evidence, and the recordings being played over and over again. The defense tried to argue that the recordings were faked, that I had motives to lie, that Sarah was a devoted daughter worried about her sick mother, but the prosecution was relentless. They showed the bank records, the Cayman Islands account opened by Mark and Sarah a month before the incident. They showed emails between them discussing how to deal with the old lady problem, referring to me. They showed text messages from Sarah to friends complaining, "I can't wait to get my mother-in-law's money and get out of this life." And then they called me to testify. I climbed onto the witness stand on shaky legs. Sarah looked at me with pleading eyes as if she still expected me to save her. "Mrs. Hayes," the prosecutor began gently, "can you tell us, in your own words, what happened on the night of December 31st? I took a deep breath and told her. Everything. The shove, the humiliation, the Alzheimer's lie, being locked in the basement, Diane's attempt to save me, Sarah's brutal shove. My voice didn't tremble. I didn't cry. I just spoke the truth, clear and firm. "Do you love your daughter, Mrs. Hayes?" the prosecutor asked. I looked at Sarah. She was crying now, tears streaming down her carefully made-up face. "I did," I replied. "I love the girl I raised. But that woman over there, she's not my daughter. My daughter died somewhere along the way. She's a stranger." Sarah sobbed louder. Her lawyer called a recess. When it was Diane's turn to testify, she was majestic. She told everything calmly and clearly. She answered every question without hesitation. "Mrs. Morrison," the defense attorney pressed her, "isn't it true that you barely knew your daughter-in-law? How can you be sure of her intentions?" Diane looked him straight in the eye. "I know her intentions because I heard her confess, because I have the recordings, because I saw her eyes when she pushed me down those stairs. There was no regret there, only anger that I had disrupted her plans. And your son? Don't you feel like protecting him?" Diane closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them again, they were filled with pain, but also with determination. "My son chose this path. He tried to kill me for money. There is no maternal protection that covers attempted murder." The room fell into absolute silence. On the 5th day, the two were called to testify. Mark tried to maintain his composure, but he contradicted himself. Sarah completely broke down, crying, begging, saying it was all a misunderstanding. But the recordings didn't lie. The jury deliberated for only 3 hours, guilty, on all counts. Attempted murder, 2 counts, kidnapping, fraud, conspiracy. Sarah screamed as the verdict was read. "Mom, Mom, help me. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to. It was Mark. It was all his idea." Mark exploded in anger. "Shut up, you idiot. This was as much your idea as mine." The security guards had to restrain them. The judge banged the gavel, calling for order, and then came the sentence. "Sarah Hayes and Mark Morrison," the judge said, his voice echoing around the room. "You planned and executed one of the most vicious crimes I've ever seen in this courtroom. You attempted to murder 2 innocent women, one of them, your own mother, motivated purely by greed. You demonstrated a complete lack of remorse or humanity." He paused, looking at both of them. "I sentence you to 20 years in prison, with no possibility of parole for at least 15 years. May God have mercy on your souls, for this court has none." Sarah collapsed. Mark went pale as a ghost. Diane squeezed my hand as they were led away in handcuffs. Sarah looked at me one last time before she was taken away. Her lips formed silent words. "I'm sorry." I didn't answer. I just watched her disappear through the doors. Outside the courthouse, reporters surrounded us. Diane spoke with elegance and brevity. "Justice has been served. Now we want peace and privacy to move forward." We got into her car, a comfortable silver Mercedes, and drove in silence for a few minutes. "How do you feel?" Diane finally asked. I thought for a long moment. "Empty," I admitted, "but also relieved and free. For the first time in a long time, free." Diane smiled. "Free is a good start." 2 weeks after the trial, Diane took me to see a house in Portland. "Why Portland?" I asked as we drove. "Because Seattle has too many bad memories for both of us," she replied. "We need a fresh start, and Portland is beautiful." The house was perfect. It wasn't the mansion Diane had before. She'd sold that property, saying it was too big and full of ghosts. This one was smaller, cozy, with a beautiful garden and a balcony where you could watch the sunset. "It has 3 bedrooms, Diane explained as we took the tour. "One for me, one for you, and an office we can share. Big kitchen. I know you love to cook. And look at this." She opened a door that led to the back garden. There was a small glass greenhouse. "I thought we could start a garden together. I've always wanted to learn how to plant." I looked at her, tears in my eyes. "Diane, I can't take all of this. It's too much." "You saved my life, Margaret," she said firmly. "Literally, and more than that, you gave me something I haven't had in years." "What?" "A real family." We embraced there in the garden, two women whom life had hurt, but who had found something precious in each other.